Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 4th, 2017. Made it to the desk just barely in time. Nothing special going on. No additional work going on here. So, no excuse for it. I guess I'm just, that's it. I'm thrown off by the supermoon. Thanks very much, Justice. Checking in on all the knobs and dials in the background. Says everything seems to be A-okay, except for my lateness caused by the proximity of the moon to... nothing happened. All right. Well, anyway, we made it. It's more or less 9 o'clock, and we're more or less ready to go. And we're more or less still, I think, allegedly, the United States of America. And so, happy Monday, happy December. I forgot to say, I did say it on the air, but I forgot to say it in the post. But I guess it counts because on Friday I forgot to say in the post that I forgot to wish everybody happy December. But I'm doing it now in both written and spoken form. A lot happened over the weekend. A lot happened during our time on the air on Friday. Let's see. So Mike Flynn made his guilty plea while we were on the air. We covered that. And then the weekend kind of exploded and went all to hell. And let's see. I think where we are at the moment, after the guilty plea, there was some back and forth about, oh, it means something. It doesn't mean something. He did it. He didn't do it. It's a lie. It's not a lie. And over the weekend, the president tweeted out what is essentially a confession to obstruction of justice, and then they decided a better story would be if we said my lawyer actually said that. And I'm not really sure why that's supposed to be better. He has some kind of cockamamie explanation. I think I may have even put it in pocket so we could sort of share it, but I don't know. Honestly, I think we all know pretty much what that means. He's just an idiot, and he doesn't care because we've already moved past that excuse. Yesterday, it was the lawyer said it, and that's okay because the underlying situation, that is the situation about which Flynn lied and the reason why Trump fired him for lying, was in fact that they hadn't told the truth, Flynn, about why and when and how and for what reason he had contacted Russians and other foreign governments on behalf of the then president-elect, I guess. But it was, I guess, earlier alleged that he had contacted them even earlier, and now news organizations are having to retract that statement. But it really shouldn't matter. Even the president-elect shouldn't likely be contacting foreign governments for the purpose of undermining current federal activity and the current government's, the then current government's foreign policy. So lots of issues swirling around that, but then we quickly moved from that to Nixon territory. So we're going with the orange dotard Nixon motif, I guess, at this point. It's now to the point where they're now putting out statements of if the president does it, it's not illegal. That is, I think it's now John Dowd's position. Why, I don't know, but it's his position that essentially, if the president does it, it's not illegal. The president cannot obstruct justice. As the chief law enforcement officer of the United States of America, there's no way for him to obstruct justice. It's impossible, and anything he does is per se illegal. Well, of course, that's nonsense. That was waiting for Richard Nixon in the articles of impeachment. And, it's a discredited theory of American governance. But because it was never proven in a court of law, I guess that's supposed to be all that matters. And it's counted as a gray area, even in Axios's morning roundup. It's not a gray area, but if you can get somebody to print that it is, you get an extra week of legs for your nonsense. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, as you can tell from the attractive music that Skype plays now when the phone rings. So good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. So I just uploaded the new Skype version. For some reason, you had gotten it earlier, and it didn't offer it to me until today.
I'm a very big star.
I can't figure any of it out.
Yeah, well,
Like,
Okay.
where are you? Like, how do I find my? Oh yeah, okay, here.
I know you got to find your way around. It's new and improved, which means I don't understand it. And well, okay, it made the call. That's the important part. You used to
Well,
be able
the
to turn off
interesting
this
thing is
music.
it also shows tweets now. So if I give you
Oh.
a link to a tweet, it shows the actual tweet.
Oh yes, yes.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is nice, and it makes things easy, and I can see I can find your stories easier when you tell me the headline.
Yeah.
It pops right up. So it's,
Okay, I'll
that's
remember
good.
that and not discuss it on the air. We'll do it as if we're professionals, and I already knew that.
Hi, who's this?
So
Okay.
the abbreviated pundit roundup is up for this morning,
All right.
and it's entitled "Russia Probe Puts White House into Circle the Wagons Mode,"
Yes.
which, by the way, is true. There's always more stuff. There's the one
wagons.
about the operative offered Trump campaign Kremlin connection using NRA ties. Thought you might find that one interesting.
Yeah, we that was one everyone should read that. We'll discuss it, I hope, but lots of mention of things we've have read on the air on this show before. So,
And
something.
let's see what else. We have Jared Kushner attempting to bring peace to the Middle East by moving the capital to Jerusalem, cutting out the Palestinians,
Our capital.
telling them that they'll just have to take whatever Israel throws them, and expecting like there won't be any outcry in the Arab world.
That plan has worked in the past.
Well, I don't know that we've ever tried that particular plan, but I guess we'll find out. We have a full-throated presidential endorsement
Okay.
for Roy Moore for Senate.
Yes, terrific. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations on that. So now, officially, the GOP is the party of the child molesters.
Yes, that's good news. I did see a nice tweet that put it well as Donald Trump. I'm not just a member of the Perv Club for Men. I'm its president. Okay.
Exactly. Meanwhile, on BuzzFeed News today, a 15 beauty queen says Trump visited dressing room. The black curtains opened and in walks Mr. Trump smiling, said the latest women to come forward from the 1997 Miss Teen USA pageant.
Oh.
That was from October 13th, 2016, but it's making the circle today because Trump is who he is.
He's endorsing the guy who liked the teenagers so much.
Yeah,
No
absolutely.
surprise. Excellent. Okay, well done. I'm glad he came out and
We'll
said
get
so.
the details on some of these stories, but here's just like a little, lightning round of stuff going
Okay.
around. Matthew Dowd says on Good Morning America today, Democrats will want to run on a GOP tax bill because it's an unpopular bill pushed by an unpopular president, passed by an unpopular Congress.
Okay.
And the other thing I saw that was kind of interesting speculation is that maybe Trump isn't so interested in whether or not the tax bill gets through the Republican Senate and House conference, assuming there is one. Maybe he needs Roy Moore to make sure he doesn't get convicted of impeachment.
Oh, yeah, he would likely love to have that.
Every vote counts.
Sure. Even child molesters.
Well, if they seat him, which they will,
Yes.
because they said they wouldn't, so they will, because
Yeah.
they don't really mean anything they say.
Right. Mitch McConnell's already backing off. Several others, I'm sure, to follow.
Now,
Backing
it's
off of
possible.
his. Yeah, okay.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless
it's
you. Wow.
possible.
You're allergic to child molesters.
I know, and I can't find a mute vote on this. Schedule. It's possible that what's happening is that Mitch McConnell is making the calculation that it's best to absolutely positively stay away from any kind of comments about Roy Moore with a week left, because anything he says, Alabama says, well, oh yeah, we're going to do the opposite. As some Alabamian wrote, if the federal government and the people in Washington say the sky is blue, down here it's green, and that's just it.
Yeah. Okay.
That'll help. So let's get to the specifics. Yeah, you mentioned this Axios piece. This was from Mike Allen. Trump lawyer claims the president cannot obstruct justice because he's the chief law enforcement officer and has every right to express his view of any case.
Okay. I mean, a view.
Mm-hmm.
And
And he says the tweet
that's
didn't
not
admit
right.
obstruction, the one where everybody now acknowledges
It did.
in the White House
Yes.
that Trump knew that Flynn was lying
Right.
at the time that he fired Comey.
Yes. Well, Flynn was lying at the time that Trump hired him.
Well, Flynn
He
was
didn't.
lying from like the time he started to do anything that had to do with foreign countries, and that was way before the election. But Dowd says the tweet didn't admit obstruction. This is an ignorant and arrogant assertion, which essentially all the lawyers I can see on the internet are making based on what Dowd supposedly wrote. I don't even believe Dowd wrote it.
No.
I'm not going to get into the parsing of whether lawyers say pleaded or pled.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. If Dowd said it and Trump adopted it and then tweeted it, it's Trump's.
Right. Also true. Yeah, I was dabbling in that a little bit this morning as they were talking about, well, no, Dowd sent it. And I was like, well, that should be provable. And then it struck me, who cares if it's provable? Trump tweeted it. It's Trump's.
Right. The articles of impeachment against Nixon began by saying he obstructed and impeded the administration of justice. And I don't have it in front of me, but if I recall correctly,
you do.
There was an obstruction of justice article against Clinton as well.
Yes,
you can be impeached for obstructing justice, whether or not Dowd's theory of the case is correct.
Yes, although I guess if we were in class, we could say, well, it's one thing to be impeached for obstruction of justice. It's another thing to be convicted in a court of law for obstruction of justice while you were president. That he would say that's still gray, but okay.
It is. Bob Woodward says the same thing. Legal thicket and really has not been settled, because normally what happens in a situation like that is the president resigns.
Yes. I mean, he can be impeached for it, and then you can try him in court, and then you can try and say, well, the president can't obstruct justice. And I suppose at that point, a court could say that's an excellent point and probably why you impeached him. He's not the president now. But he was then. Yeah, well, they undid that pretty good. So
yeah, well, that'll be interesting. So sum it up. The Daily 202 in the Washington Post today says botched damage control efforts keep making the Russia scandal worse for Trump.
That is, I am glad for that.
Here's the big idea. President Trump's aides spent the weekend applying tourniquets to stop the bleeding from more self-inflicted wounds, continuing a pattern. That pattern, by the way, would be incompetency.
Okay.
The White House took a bad story and made it worse. With his legal exposure increased, the president then sought to change the subject. Mm-hmm. Roy Moore endorsement will do that.
Yes.
On Saturday, Trump tweeted this about his former national security advisor. I had to fire General Flynn because he lied to the vice president and the FBI. And, of course, this morning he's saying, I feel so sorry for Mike Flynn. He served his country. Hillary lied about everything, and he's guilty and she's not. This is horrible. Or something along those lines.
Well, you lied and you're not guilty yet, so what can I tell you?
Legal experts said this could be used as evidence that the president was trying to obstruct justice when he allegedly asked James Comey to take it easy on Flynn, and then when he didn't, fired him.
Yes.
So Trump's personal lawyer claimed responsibility. A person close to the White House involved in the case termed this Saturday tweet a screw-up of historic proportions that has caused enormous consternation in the White House. Washington is now consumed by speculation about what shoe drops next. Here are 7 questions that will determine what course Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation takes from here. What did Flynn give up in exchange for leniency? Has anyone else lied to the FBI? What did Kushner tell Mueller's team about Flynn in the Russia context?
A lie.
Yeah, so he goes next. How many other people on the Trump team knew about or approved of Flynn's interactions with the Russians?
11.
Everybody knew. And you know what? That includes Mike Pence. The whole idea that Pence doesn't know is ridiculous.
Oh,
what did Trump himself know, and when did he know it? Ooh, that sounds familiar.
Oh, yes, that's
Who is that,
true.
Howard Baker?
That's a tough question, I mean, because of the Trump know part. But, I mean, when was he informed?
When does he remember?
Right.
Who else and what else is Mueller looking at that we don't know about yet?
Egg noodles.
And number 7, how far will Trump and congressional Republicans go to thwart the ongoing Russia investigations? These are all great questions.
They are good. And I played with them like I was on Family Feud.
And?
I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And
Exactly. We'll have to wait and see for a lot of this stuff. So this just brings up an old, and I mean really old, 1970s style old piece written none other Art Buchwald.
Wow. Okay.
We've done this on the show before, but it just is yet again relevant.
Well, we keep coming around to the same problems.
Yeah. So, Washington. These are difficult times for people who are defending the Nixon administration. No matter where they go, they are attacked by pseudo-liberals, McGovern lovers, heterosexual constitutionalists, and paranoid John Dean believers. As a public service, I am printing instant responses for loyal Nixonites when they are attacked at a party. Please cut it out and carry it in your pocket. In those days, you didn't have a little iPhone that was about the same size.
Right.
You can
Yeah, put it in your notes.
For example, number one, everyone does it. That's your first response. Oh, well, Donald Trump is president and obstructing justice. Well, everybody does it.
Yes.
He's about to fire the guy who's
Hillary.
a special counsel who's closing in on him. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
Nixon did it.
Why don't you go after Hillary? Crooked Hillary.
Yeah.
Right.
Number
let's do
two.
it. Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's
Why did
what
you
I mean.
let the crooked? Well, number two in those days was, what about Chappaquiddick?
Ah. You can still say that.
You can still say that. Number three, a president can't keep track of everything his staff does.
That's true. You can't.
Number four, the press is blowing the whole thing up.
Yes. Familiar.
Overreacting. Liberals are overreacting to this.
Oh.
Yeah, just the way liberals overreacted to Charles Grassley saying the trouble with poor people is they spend all their money on booze and women.
Yeah, right. That's very.
I'm not sure if he
modern.
meant poor women. I don't have a clarification on that. He said it to the Des Moines Register. But, as somebody pointed out, Lisa Quigley pointed out on Twitter, I like how old senators like Grassley and Hatch start saying what they really think. Saves us a lot of trouble trying to guess what they mean.
Yeah. It's an outdated sort of thing. I saw somebody comment on it like saying this helps you clarify the situation if you're the kind of person that thinks that every time or well, how do they describe it? Everybody is a 1940s suited wolf, whose eyes pop out and turn to hearts when an attractive woman walks by.
Right, which is a great Looney Tunes. But Dave Weigel points out, by the way, as an aside, Trump has endorsed Roy Moore on the 1-year anniversary of a dude firing a gun in Comet ping pong because of a fake pedophilia scandal.
Oh, yes.
Perfection. I mean, just life comes at you. Anyway, back to Art Buchwald.
Yeah, right.
The Democrats are sore because they lost the election.
I've heard that one lately.
Are you going to believe a rat like John Dean or the President of the United States? How about wait till all the facts come out? And, of course, number 9, what about Chappaquiddick?
Right. All the facts thing, that at least still has some currency.
Number 10, if you impeach Nixon, you get Agnew.
Pence, he's crazy.
Yeah. The only thing wrong with Watergate is they got caught. And what about Daniel Ellsberg stealing the Pentagon Papers? Besides, it happens in Europe all the time, and people would be against Nixon no matter what he did.
True.
And, I'd rather have a crook in the White House than a fool.
Yeah, this is a very familiar list.
What's the big deal about finding out what your opposition is up to? Besides, the president was too busy running the country to know what was going on.
Yeah.
And McGovern would have lost anyway. And besides, what about Chappaquiddick?
It's a long list, and it's
I know. Well, it's actually it's 36 long, but it's great. This thing should be tried in the courts and not on TV. You're hearing all this stuff now. That's why it's so funny.
Yeah, it's
Franklin D. Roosevelt did a lot of worse things, and besides, I'm sick and tired of hearing about Watergate, and so is everybody else.
Yeah,
and what about Chappaquiddick?
It's on there again,
right? If you say one more word about Watergate, I'll punch you in the nose. But if the person's bigger than you, then if you say one more word about Watergate, I'm leaving.
Okay.
Right? If it's your house and you can't leave and the person is bigger than you, then you say, well, what about Chappaquiddick?
We're back to it. What about it? What about Miss Teen USA?
But he's doing the same thing with Hillary. He's doing exactly the same thing with Hillary. What's different about it?
Nothing.
Hillary is his Chappaquiddick.
Yeah. And by the way, you very frequently still hear people say that. What about Chappaquiddick?
You do.
It's amazing.
So Evan Siegfried, Republican,
yes.
Unhappy Republican with his party, tweets this morning, the President of the United States officially endorses an accused child molester.
Yes. Congratulations.
And you can't say that enough. It just takes so long to sink in that in fact is what's going on.
It's a sad state of affairs, but entirely predictable. I think there might not even be anyone on Twitter that didn't predict that he was going to just flat out endorse him. So
anyway, that's basically the background about what's going on this morning. It's a crazy week, followed by, I'm sure, another crazy week next week, but it was preceded by an insane week last week.
Oh, that's different.
And, it really doesn't seem to be getting any better.
No, it's good for radio, except I feel bad about all the stories that we
Feel bad
haven't
about the country,
discussed.
even though it gives us material.
Oh, right. Country. Yes. Forgot about that. Love the country. It's
Right.
terrific. Yeah, this is very difficult. And wow. And there's more moving parts to it. And some of which will be part of the Mueller investigation. One thing I put away this morning in Pocket, a McClatchy report, just throw out the headline for you. Despite pledge, Trump company works with a foreign entity again. So we're back on this time the foreign emoluments. But progress in the lawsuits regarding domestic emoluments as we speak. But it's hard to focus on it because you have the president of the United States is endorsing child molesters for Senate. So it's hard to take your eye off of that ball.
So between Robert Mueller and what's going on there,
yes,
and lots of speculation about what comes next in terms of what does he do? Does he fire Mueller? And on the other hand, Roy Moore and endorsing a alleged child molester, an accused child molester with credible accusations.
Yep.
And number three, passing this tax plan, which isn't law yet.
Oh, right, that thing.
But looks awfully bad, is very unpopular. Democrats are going to wind up running on this. They've already gotten a 10-point lead in the generic ballot for next year. And the Republicans may well lose the House over this. And if that happens, then we're talking impeachment.
We might find out whether there are things the president does that are illegal.
Yeah, because you can actually go do proper investigations instead of having people like Devin Nunes trying to impede the investigations with sideshows. I think the latest is he wants to cite the FBI and Department of Justice for contempt.
Oh.
Because
yes,
I don't know,
right.
I'm not sure why. Something. Look over here, squirrel.
They subpoenaed some documents, and the FBI and others subpoenaed have not yet turned them over. We discussed it a little bit last week, probably Thursday or so, and the insanity of the whole thing is that Trump was rage tweeting at Fox and Friends the other day about this. And as was pointed out, I think NYC Southpaw, pointing out just how insane it was. The president of the United States was rage tweeting at the television that he was furious with his own executive departments for not complying with congressional subpoenas. He was siding with Congress against his own executive for not turning over documents. And of course, he's in charge of the executive. And if he wanted those documents turned over, there was actually something he could have been doing about it, but instead he was yelling at the television.
Is this a precedent for when he's impeached? I mean, is he going to say, well, normally I would fight this, but I've already gone on record as saying that Congress really needs to get everything from the executive if they ask for it.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I'd
bring it out.
I'd like to stonewall here.
Right.
And by the way, at the very, very bottom of the list, I sent you a
the bottom of the list,
Nixon era piece, which I think is from 1974. From Doonesbury.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
It's a picture of the White House, and fellows are building a stone wall in front of it, just obscuring it. And not only obscuring it, but obscuring whatever the White House says. I don't care what happens. I want you to stonewall it, and then you can't see it because it's all covered by stone wall.
Yes.
Been there, done that is what I'm trying to say.
Build the wall.
Build the wall.
He was
That's
into
it.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, these things do have a way of coming around again, don't they?
They do. And for those of us who are old enough to remember Nixon in that era, eerily familiar, and it's going to end the same way.
That would be a good start. I would like to see that impeachment just really finally go through and be used once, at least, just to show that it's still around and for real. And I'd like to... as clear a stamp as possible. But I don't think it would happen all the way through necessarily. On the one hand, I think Trump, what do you think? I mean, is Trump the kind of guy who digs in his heels and says, I'm not going no matter what, or until they throw me out of here? Or is he the kind of guy who says, in the end, when he sees the writing on the wall, says, I don't need this, screw this crap, I'm quitting you. You can't fire me.
Well, as Neera Tanden points out, just a reminder, if you don't like being part of a party that supports alleged child molesters, you can leave.
True.
You can be an independent, or you can join the Democratic Party. But you don't have to vote for this. You don't have to support this. There's no obligation whatsoever.
Please don't use it as an opportunity to say that America is clamoring for a third party. They might be, but you could just clean your house.
Always possible to do.
Yeah.
Now, there's a glitch, which is a problem for Doug Jones running in Alabama. Apparently, the ballot down there is one of those ballots where you can click off, I vote the whole party line.
Oh, okay.
So if you can't bring yourself to vote for Moore, you can just vote Republican.
Okay. Well,
he gets the vote.
Yeah, I get
that used to be the case in New York, too, with the old levers. You could just pull the lever for that Democratic line. And
New York City, they do that. That's what we should tell Alabamians. They do this in New York City. Oh,
right.
Well, I'm not doing it. Well, that will be a problem because then you can go in there and just say, well, I don't remember voting for Roy Moore. It just happened. I guess so. Okay. Interesting. Good point.
So how is NBC Nightly News describing this? The president's lawyer claims he drafted the president's tweet, sent it to the White House social media director to publish as the president. When asked for the original email he sent to the aide, the president's lawyer said, he dictated it orally.
I knew that would finally come out. I said this morning, after they said they sent it, I said, all right, because there's receipts for that. We're going to have to see the email chain. Oh, yeah. He dictated it orally. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, see you on the other side of the break for a short piece before I scoot off to work.
Okay, very good. Yes, we are going to take our 2-minute break in just a minute. What was the source you were reading here? Click that one over to me. I'd like to read that story about
I shall. It was NBC. It was just a tweet, but I'll send it.
All right. If it was a phone call, there'll be a record. We'll be right back after this short break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring, monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with me. We were having some fun over the break talking about that NBC Nightly News tweet. That's a pretty unlikely story, I must say. I sent it. I sent it. Yeah, what'd you send it with? A telephone. All Americans speak of it that way, right? When did you tell me that? Remember, I sent it to you over the telephone using my voice. I orally dictated it to you. Yes, just common street slang among the kids these days.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as I pointed out during the break to David, this Trump defense is obviously going to be that tweet was from NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, and how do we know that Lester Holt actually wrote it?
Right.
Could have been an intern.
Yes. Oh, and a lot of people over the weekend tried to actually tweet that one to me. Well, you understand the president does have many people who formulate his statements, etc. And, of course, that is true. Now, we've never had
But the only one we know that tweets is Dan Scavino. I don't know that we have anybody else. But, I suggested that maybe if Trump actually tweets it himself, I think Obama did this too. If Trump tweets it himself, he ought to add the initials RZ for Ron Ziegler.
Yeah, these guys, I mean, they have mentioned before, and I know that, even when Barack Obama tweeted, although he had like a little protocol where it was understood that he wasn't
Didn't he
really
say
tweeting
BO if
unless,
it was actually him or
yes,
something?
right, exactly. So there was that. We understood with Trump that Scavino, we've heard this before because he's gotten in trouble with it before. Did you say that? That's ridiculous. Oh no, it wasn't me. It was my social media, director. So we've heard about Scavino before. And then the initial reporting about Dowd was that he wrote the tweet and he put it that way, that I wrote the tweet and then, or drafted. That was what he said. And everybody said, does that mean you tweeted for him? And it raised a serious question. And there was a highly recommended diary on Daily Kos about it that posed the question early in this story of how many people are authorized to pretend to be the president on Twitter. We really do ought to have a right to know that. And that raised the question, for Twitter, like, should this be a verified account if it could be dozens of people with access? We don't know. And then they backpedal.
Well, there's a lot of questions there. I mean, what if he's advocating violence by retweeting fake Muslim?
Yes, right. Oh, it wasn't me. It was my, so when are we going to have some accountability for Scavino? When are we going to know? And of course, even during the campaign, we were all talking about, on this show anyway, about the difference between the tweets that came from the Android phone and tweets that came from the iPhones. So it's a history with him. But, yes, there are presidents and famous people all over the world obviously have assistants that do their public relations for them.
Who is the belligerent, obnoxious Trump lawyer who gets into trouble sometimes? Michael Cohen?
Yeah.
Right? I can just see a trial. Cohen on the on the stand there, and the lawyer says to him, "So Trump tweeted this thing that basically claims that he knew about the whole thing. Isn't that obstruction of justice?" And Cohen just looks at the camera and says, "That's fake news."
Right? Says who? Says who?
Says who?
Yeah,
Says who?
He's got his name on it.
He tweets nothing. Nobody knows what he tweets. Nobody knows. It's fake news.
Yep.
Says who? So you got this problem here.
Yep.
And of course, but credibility's in the garbage anyway. Anyway, so that's it for really the summary. I'm going to leave you with two pieces that you might find interesting or not. You'll decide whether you want to do them or not. Mm-hmm. They're at the very bottom of the list here. The first one is, of course, from Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein, writing in the New York Times today, Sunday Review, how the Republicans broke Congress.
Yes. How did they do it?
Congress no longer works the way it's supposed to. We've said that before. But we stand by our assessment of the political scene at the time. What's astounding and still largely unappreciated is the unexpected and rapid nature of the decline in American national politics and how one-sided its cause. If in 2006 one could cast aspersions on both parties, over the past decade it's become clear it's a Republican Party, as an institution, as a movement, as a collection of politicians, that has done unique, extensive, and possibly irreparable damage to the American political system. Even today, many people like to imagine that the damage has all been Trump, that he took the Republican Party hostage. The problem goes much deeper. And it points out they don't come to this issue as political partisans. Three major developments in the party required us to change our view. First, beginning in the 90s, Republicans strategically demonized Congress and government more broadly and flouted the norms of lawmaking. Second, there was the Obama effect. When Mr. Bush became president, Democrats worked with him to enact sweeping education reform early on and provided the key votes to pass his top priority tax cuts. With President Barack Obama, it was different. While many argue that the problem was that Mr. Obama failed to schmooze enough, we saw a deliberate Republican strategy to oppose all of his initiatives and frame his attempts to compromise as weak or inauthentic. And then third, and they flesh out each one of these things a little bit more. Third, we've seen the impact of significant changes in the news media, which had a far greater importance on the right than the left. The development of the modern conservative media echo chamber began with the rise of Rush Limbaugh, talk radio in the 80s, ramped up with Fox News, Matt Drudge, Andrew Breitbart, Breitbart's successor Steve Bannon, leveraged the power of the internet to espouse their far-right views, and with the advent of social media, we saw the emergence of a radical alt-right media ecosystem able to create its own facts and build an audience around hostility to the establishment, anti-immigration sentiment, and racial resentment. Nothing even close to comparable exists on the left. So those are his 3 points and fleshes it out. The other piece I thought was interesting is from Chris Ladd, who describes himself as a recovering Republican in Forbes. The GOP has become a dangerous cult.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm wondering if this is going to... it bounces me to one of their welcome page, but it put me through. Okay, I gotcha. Just go. Oh, look, it's the what is
Marshall
that guy?
Applewhite, leader of the Heaven's Gate cult,
Yeah.
shown in an updated image in front
Undated,
of this
okay.
article. It's perfect for the article itself. And so there you have it. I'll leave those with you. You can decide what you want to do with
don't
it.
think
But for now,
Okay.
this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. I may be on the show for the next 2 hours. I'm not sure. It depends on Skype and whether I can figure out how to turn this thing off.
Well, we'll listen to you driving to work and
Exactly. But I'll my washing machine and whether the phone goes off, and of course Abby the doorbell. But I'll be with you on Wednesday, and we'll see where it takes us.
right. You could just stay connected until Wednesday if you want.
For all I know, it's exactly what's going to happen.
All right. Watch your language for the rest of the
Yeah.
day.
Take care.
Thank you. You do the same. He's a pediatric pulmonologist. I'm pretty sure he's going to be watching his language anyway. And regardless, it's pretty. I guess we can fairly say you're mild mannered. Yes. Okay. Well, I see you've hung up. At least Skype tells us that. By the way, the image of Marshall Applewhite is an undated image. It looks, I guess, in his quick reading, he said updated image. There are no updated images of Marshall Applewhite, or if there are, you don't want to see them. Ooh. He's a mess these days. Okay. Well, the GOP has become a dangerous cult. And, so this is really interesting. Number of things happening now. The idea of everybody's making fun of the idea of sending I sent it orally, right? I guess there's that. So of course, then we'll have, if he sent it orally, that would either mean he did it over the phone, for which there would be a phone record, or that he did it in person, for which there would be a visitor's log in the White House. Let's see, we have a question here being put to us from our Twitter friend Wouter Vanderhorst, who says, is Dowd a federal employee or is he retained as outside counsel? And I know he's usually cited as his personal lawyer. So I guess that would mean outside counsel. So, all right, well, there you go. Anyway, so there'd be visitor logs or something, although they do say that the White House wasn't even keeping visitors logs anymore, right? I think that was one of his things. So, once they ask for those things, of course, they won't have any of those things. And so it'll become, I dictated it via semaphore from a nearby hilltop. I used a heliograph, right, from who did that famously? Wasn't it Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe used to do that back and forth? That's what I heard. Anyway, maybe it's just, was it Monroe? Madison? Who had the nearby? Let's see. So Jefferson was at Monticello. Ashlawn was Monroe's estate, right? Not Madison's, or was it Madison's? Madison, I thought, was... where did Madison live? Is his place Montpelier? I can't remember now. Anyway, I guess these are things that fade from memory. We'll Google it because we can do that sort of thing on our show because we're like netroots, and so I'm using the computer or something. Let's see. So, but Montpelier was, I think, too far away. Ashlawn was the name of Monroe's estate, and it's close enough to, that's the whole point. It was close enough to Monticello to be able to do that. Now, Madison was is Montpelier, right? And I'm not just imagining that because Vermont. Yeah, that's right. But it was in Orange, Virginia, which is like the next county or two over. They live close to one another, and I'm sure, in a coach, it wasn't such a terrible ride. Although in those days the roads were terrible. But Madison, it's funny because Madison and Jefferson, I think, ended up having probably a closer relationship. I don't know whether in later days Monroe and Jefferson were quite so close, but back in the day, everyone was talking. Anyhow, so they could be doing it that way. Smoke signals, I see, has been suggested. That's a possibility. This is going to end up being a mess, but it is going to end up being a distraction as well. So perhaps we focus on something else for the day. But it's worth noting that it's causing a bit of an uproar. Anyhow, let's see. What other fun things are happening? There's plenty more, and we'll have to. I'm tempted to spend the rest of the time tweeting and discussing all of that. Now, there's another question out there, asked and answered, I believe, but it was asked the other day, and Bill has asked it again. And I gather that since we put the little plug in there for seeking more Patreon donations, and thank you very much. There has been some response to that, and thank you to all those of you who didn't need that kind of prodding. Thank you to those of you who responded to it, whether it's the first time you've been asked because you're new to the show, or you're a longtime listener that always intended to help and support the show and just needed a little bit of a reminder. But let's see. We have, Bill was asking, and I did see it asked the other day, what is that French song played during the break? And you're asking me, what's the French song that I played during the break? I don't play it. Justice does. So thankfully, Justice answered the question. If you're listening at home and were wondering, he says, let's see, Justice says, that would be France Gauls Laissez tomber les fils. I am terrible with French. I never studied it at all, so I have no idea how to do the accent or how to read those things. I'm good with Spanish, but other than that, I'm in trouble. But you can see it, and Bill has tweeted it out with some thumbs up emojis. I'll tweet it out there in case you, too, are interested in the answer. And I think there was another answer given, too, but I didn't see who gave it before it scrolled by so quickly. So I hope it was the right answer. Anyway, let's see. Oh, yes, right. Oh, that's another good point, too, about visiting the White House. If the tweet was dictated in person orally, Bruce McFarland tweeting, there would be, of course, a Secret Service activity as well. They would know when he came in, and video capture as well of him entering the White House. But, that's neither here nor there. It was a pretty Trumpian tweet, and I think we can all probably agree on that. And, of course, the fact that he basically adopts it as his own statement once he tweets it. I also saw somebody say, oh, well, there might be the reason they might be saying that is to try and establish some sort of attorney-client privilege. About what, I'm not really sure, because it wasn't my statement. I don't believe in it, and I don't think it does anything. And I think the fact that, I think most attorney-client privilege is probably waived once you tweet the work product, but it's a, whatever, new frontier here, I guess, and I suppose there's some possibility that we might find out we don't quite understand exactly how courts would interpret this stuff. Okay, so let's see. Other fun things that are out there, things to catch up on, things that bear on all this. How about this one? Billy Bush has a op-ed, I guess you could say, in the New York Times, an opinion piece, except it's fact with respect to, well, he's in there to establish this fact. That Donald Trump has been running around, I guess, floating the trial balloon since January, reportedly, that it wasn't really his voice or that it had somehow been doctored on the Access Hollywood tapes. So Billy Bush, who lost his job over this, Donald Trump, who did not, Billy Bush has something to say about this. And it's, yes, Donald Trump, you said that. That's the headline. And it's a good piece. And I don't know he may be writing it to try and rehabilitate his image. I don't know what he's doing these days. I think he's generally probably fine, and there's plenty of money to live on for Billy Bush. But, if you're a normal human being, and I don't know that he is, but he's more normal than most of the other Bushes, it seems. And he's got a lot to say. So he wants to he wants to clean up his image, and he's feeling annoyed about all of this. Like, I guess you could also say it implicates his skills as a reporter too, to have it questioned whether or not this really happened. And Greg adds some commentary on this, by the way. Donald Trump just says, Billy Bush is a hologram, not a real person. And by the way, the statements he made on Access Hollywood were dictated to him by his personal lawyer, Daffy Duck. Okay, it's as believable as anything else. Billy Bush writes this. He said it, and then quotes him, of course, grab him by the pussy. And if nothing else, Donald Trump has made it possible to say that on the radio. Although the FCC never hears what we say, so I'm not certain that that's really true. I don't know if you can really say it on the radio. I'm not there, so I can't tell you. Anyway, of course he said it, Billy Bush says, and we laughed along without a single doubt. Now, before we get too far, we laughed along. That's why he was kind of like why he was fired and why people are angry about this stuff. And I'm glad he admits that he laughs along, and he kind of qualifies it by saying we laughed along without a single doubt that this was hypothetical hot air from America's highest rated bloviator. That's an interesting and I think believable excuse. It's an excuse and you're not supposed to laugh along, but I could, you know what? I will say this. Hearing somebody say that, particularly somebody, famous / important. He wasn't really important at the time. And nobody knew he was running for president at the time. Had he been running for president at the time, I don't know what the reaction would have been. Probably it only would have made this situation worse. When you hear people say stuff like that and you're a normal person, I think nervous laughter is the normal-ish reaction. In the same way that the reaction of women who are victimized by this stuff, at least among the natural reactions, among the range of natural reactions, is paralysis, confusion, and even the instinct to try afterwards to laugh it off somehow. For some people, not for everybody, clearly, and others, don't take the guff at all and will swing and knock you the F out is what will happen. It's more so these days than before, because now people are, clued into this stuff. But the reactions are always kind of weird. You don't know what the hell to do with somebody who says something so bizarre and crazy. And there's also a large portion of the male population that laughs along because they either do it also, as we're now finding out, you do that too, so do I. And of course, I think in the larger portion of humanity in the middle, kind of like I laughed because it was absurd / I didn't know what else to do / that kind of humor is funny. I mean, we haven't really, aged out that segment of the population that was brought up on, and that segment of the population would include me, although I think a lot of people my age are sort of becoming, like I said, clued in, or I kept wanting to say hip to it, but that explains how old you are, I guess. The idea that, you're not supposed to just laugh along with that stuff anymore, but that was the culture. I don't want to use that as the excuse, but that really was the culture, and we've been going over this over the last couple of weeks. I know a lot of people have been combing through their memories and saying, popular movies and television shows, etc. The whole thing was filled with the whole, sexual innuendo, and it was the standby go-to joke, even for a generation slightly older than mine, I guess, was the last time it was considered broadly funny and or innovative for the entire content of a television show or movie to center around ribaldry. Remember that? Remember that John Lovitz? Was it John Lovitz character? Where the Tales of Ribaldry, right? But the whole premise of stand-up careers and movie careers, etc., was essentially sexual harassment and sexual innuendo and sexualizing women and holding them up as nothing but props in movies and television shows. Where, and even into later days, we're making some jokes this morning, and Bill referenced Porky's, the old stupid movie. That the central premise of the poster, right? Remember, the movie poster for Porky's was a pervert kid peeping into the girls' locker room showers at high school. That kid is a senator now. So, tells you a little something about that was acceptable mainstream humor, where like now, I wonder if you put out a movie that had a scene like that, I think you could probably get away with it in the sense that they wouldn't come and arrest you for making that film, but you would get greenlighted and be able to produce that film. I think for sure you could have done it last year. This year, I think right now, I think most producers would be like, I'm going to pass on that. There's some films out now, but because of the lag time in making films, it takes years to get things through production. They were approved before everybody, before the latest round of awakening, I guess, to sexual harassment. Now it would be hard to get that thing produced, but it wouldn't be unusual to see a film like that getting set for release. And if there was something they could do to block release for a little while, you might see that thing locked away in the vault. But yeah, there's many reasons why a guy like Billy Bush might have laughed along. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, I'll take him at his word, because even if it's not the way he felt, I think it's the way that a lot of people do feel. And it's kind of important to hear things expressed in this way about what Donald Trump did, even if it's a rosier version of the true history of the incident. But with that caveat in mind, I'll continue reading it. So he says, of course he said it, and we laughed along without a single doubt that this was hypothetical hot air from America's highest rated bloviator, along with Donald Trump and me. There were 7 other guys present on the bus at the time, and every single one of us assumed we were listening to a crass stand-up act. He was performing. Surely, we thought, none of this was real. We now know better. And that's as important a revelation, I think, of the regular guy's reaction to all of this as learning about, or hearing the women's perspective about this stuff. But this is true. Guys used to laugh at this stuff and now will feel trepidation properly at doing so and think back and say, oh my God, how much of what I laughed at was real? Because, of course, we were being fed these movies and television shows and whatever else as, haha, that's ridiculous. And now we find out that 95% of it, if not all of it, was being produced by men who were really doing this stuff. And that makes us feel a lot worse about having laughed at all of this stuff. And, wow, it's kind of weird. So I don't know. I think this is an important perspective. So we now know better. Recently, I sat down and read an article dating from October of 2016. And we just read an article dating from October of 2016 about Donald Trump walking in on the Miss Teen USA contestants. But what was this one that he read? Well, he read an article dating from October of 2016. It was published days after my departure from NBC, Billy Bush says, a time when I wasn't processing anything productively. In it, the author reviewed the various first-hand accounts about Mr. Trump that at that point had come from 20 women. Can we say that again? 20 women had accused him. That's far more than Roy Moore. Some of what Natasha Stoynoff, Rachel Crooks, Jessica Leeds, and Jill Harth alleged involved forceful kissing. Right? You remember that stuff. Ms. Harth said he pushed her up against a wall with his hands all over her, trying to kiss her. He was relentless, she said. I didn't know how to handle it. Her story makes the whole better use some Tic Tacs and just start kissing them routine real. I believe her. An important part of it, I believe her, to be sure. A more interesting point to me is, essentially what he's saying here, Bush's whole piece here is, I thought we were listening to a bullshit artist. I think you can actually get away with saying that on the air these days, but luckily we're not even on a radio show, so it's okay, right? I thought we were listening to a bullshitter. But as it turns out, he was describing the truth. I only now, rereading this article, does it strike me, oh my God, he told me, I should get some Tic Tacs. Beautiful women, I can't help myself. It's like a magnet. I just automatically walk up and start kissing them. And then he finds out, here's a woman that said, you know what? I was just standing there minding my own business, and the guy walked up to me and just started kissing me. Oh my God, the Tic Tac thing. I remember now. Holy crap, he really does this. Kristen Anderson, The article continues, said that Mr. Trump reached under her skirt and, I got to quote it to you here in the morning. So it's a morning show. I could wait till the afternoon, but then I wouldn't be on here. I reached under her skirt and, quote, touched her vagina through her underwear, clinically speaking, while they were at a New York nightclub in the 1990s. That makes the grab 'em by the pussy routine real. I believe her. President Trump is currently indulging in some revisionist history, reportedly telling allies, including at least one United States senator, who would be voting on impeachment later perhaps, that the voice on the tape is not his. That has hit a raw nerve in me. I can only imagine how it has reopened the wounds of the women who came forward with their stories about him and did not receive enough attention. This country is currently trying to reconcile itself to years of power abuse and sexual misconduct. Its leader, its leader, is wantonly poking the bear. In 2005, I was in my first full year as a co-anchor of the show Access Hollywood on NBC. Mr. Trump, then on The Apprentice, was the network's biggest star, and I'm sure he'll write you a thank you note for that, Billy. The key to succeeding in my line of work was establishing a strong rapport with celebrities. It's Access Journalism. The show's called Access Hollywood, so you can't be too surprised about this. A key to succeeding in my line of work was establishing a strong rapport with celebrities. I did that and was rewarded for it. Maybe that wasn't a good idea, but that was the idea for them. It wasn't a good idea. It was just the idea, right? So I was rewarded for it. My segments with Donald Trump, when I was just a correspondent, were part of the reason I got promoted. NBC tripled my salary and paid for my moving van from New York to Los Angeles. That's nice. They do such things. Was I acting out of self-interest? You bet I was. Was I alone? Far from it. With Mr. Trump's outsized viewership back in 2005, and it's almost time for our break here, so let's play this. With Mr. Trump's outsized viewership back in 2005, everybody from Billy Bush on up, third person, to the top brass of the 52nd floor had to stroke the ego of the big cash cow along the way to higher earnings. It was part of the business model. You just, A, you let him say what he says, and B, you laughed along. You just thought he was doing it for cash himself. Instead, he was doing it for cheap thrills as well. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just taking that short 1 minute break. But I think you've probably figured that out by now. Even though I didn't say that we were about to take a break, I hope that the audio played to you in the interim made that obvious. Let's get rid of the music. Oops, oh dear, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, Eric, hold on a second. Why can't I get you to pause there? Well, you know what? That brings a good point to mind. It's probably time to let Eric's piece run at some point, but I didn't realize I had positioned it directly beneath the music. So, all right, little accidental hint at what's to come there. But let me finish up with Billy Bush at the very least. When we left before the break, he had noted that at the time, there was a lot of money and a lot of success, a lot of money to be made, a lot of success to be had by allowing Trump to bloviate on camera. What did it mean? What did they think they were listening to? They thought they were listening to, an idiot braggart who was perhaps letting out enough rope to hang himself if he ever became someone that anybody cared to hang on sexual harassment charges. Now, interestingly, this is I'm sure occurred to many of you out there. If he were still simply the host of this idiotic show, The Apprentice, like right now in this atmosphere, that tape emerging, you could lose that job. I mean, we see what's happening in the entertainment industry. People are getting kicked out, not exactly left or right. It's really more probably a slow trickle at this point in terms of what's out there, undiscovered. But this job he would have lost. NBC is already in the business of booting its sexual harassers, as we learned from at least the story of Matt Lauer. And I suppose there are probably fewer stars with bigger cachet at the network So I would think it would be a relatively simple thing to simply get rid of others, no matter how highly rated at this point. And the irony is that had he stayed where he was and continued with The Apprentice, that gig he would have lost. But the presidency, well, that has complications. There's constitutional implications, and you can't kick him out of that job quite so easily. So we're stuck with him, at least for the time being. Anyway, he is noting, for the record, that was the business model. And whatever it took, you excused whatever the hell was happening in order to ride the cash cow. And that's beginning to change. But back in those days, it was allowable for whatever reason. So was he acting out of self-interest? Yes. He was far from it. Sure. Everybody was making money and rising in the industry by stroking the ego of the big cash cow along the way to higher earnings. And of course, this was the biggest ego going, and he was the most overt in demanding ego stroking. But certainly everybody who considered themselves a big star demanded it. They just didn't demand it as publicly as Donald Trump did. Maybe he is the most transparent guy. Who knows? I guess in that way of considering it, perhaps he is. None of us, Billy says, we're guilty of knowingly enabling our future president. That is to say, no one really believed he was ever going to be a future president, although you were knowingly enabling something else. But again, you were confused about it at the time. But all of us were guilty of sacrificing a bit of ourselves in the name of success. Fair enough, I suppose. 10 years later, I did speak up. Soon after Mr. Trump declared his candidacy, speak up in a certain manner of speaking, I guess. Mr. Trump declared his candidacy. I let it be known on Access Hollywood Live that I thought this was an absurd idea. Though you didn't say it would be absurd because I have lots of tape of him admitting to sexually abusing women. But that came later. In the days, weeks, and months to follow, I was highly critical of the idea of a Trump presidency, although, we all were. The man who once told me, ironically, in another off-camera conversation, after I called him out for inflating his ratings, he said to me, people will just believe you. You just tell them and they believe you. Was, I thought, not a good choice to lead our country. Yeah, the guy who would say something like that. But that's true. A great insight into Donald Trump and the way he views everything in the world. You just tell, people will believe you. You just tell them something and they'll believe you. Not everyone, of course, but enough to get by. And that's been the secret of his success, which is to say it was fake and he hasn't been a success. But again, I was highly critical of the idea of a Trump presidency, yes, but you could have been highly critical of it because you thought he was an abuser of women. But then again, his point here is we didn't believe at the time that he really was an abuser of women. We just thought he was a hopeless, idiotic, loutish braggart who thought that we would think better of him if he bragged about what we would have called at the time, sexual conquest, as opposed to sexual abuse of everybody you meet. But since they allegedly thought it was just BS, maybe, I don't know. But they certainly could have said something. But again, as soon as you start to hear the accusations, I don't know, remember what the chronology of it all was. Did we hear those accusations before the Access Hollywood tape? Or did the Access Hollywood tape break the dam and we began to hear all those accusations? Of course, I mean, it may not have been top of mind for him, but that might have been interesting. But I guess if he thought it was all crap, he wouldn't necessarily have thought, I should release this tape because I have this tape of him admitting he abuses women. I'm not certain that it's really true. Certainly somebody who doesn't believe that what he was hearing was true isn't going to be like, I should get involved in the presidential race and try and screw it up for a guy who I guess theoretically has a chance of winning and ruining my life forever after if I'm wrong about this. Anyway, apparently he says, I tried to conduct a serious interview with him, Trump, as a candidate. Each time I requested one, I was turned down, which is interesting because you would think, like, Trump was so comfortable on Access Hollywood. Now, did he ask for a serious interview after the tapes came out or before? And I mean, anybody could, if you're really running for president and taking yourself seriously, I'd probably turn down an Access Hollywood request too. But I'm surprised that Trump would, unless Trump at some point thought, ooh, he's got tapes on me saying I'm a serial sexual abuser. I should avoid this guy. We can't really tell. This moment in American life, Billy Bush continues, is no doubt painful for many women. It is especially painful for the women who have come forward, and at the risk of forever being linked to one event, this man, this president of the United States, I still can't believe I just wrote that. To these women, I will never know the fear you felt or the frustration of being summarily dismissed and called a liar, but I do know a lot about the anguish of being inexorably linked to Donald Trump. You have my respect and admiration. You are culture warriors at the forefront of necessary change. I have faith that when the hard work of exposing these injustices is over, the current media drama of who did what to whom will give way to a constructive dialogue between mature men and women in the workplace and beyond. The activist and gender relations expert Jackson Katz has said that this is not a women's issue, it's a men's issue. That's a great place to start and something I have real thoughts about, but it is a story for another day. Today is about reckoning and reawakening, and I hope it reaches all the guys on the bus. On a personal note, this last year has been an odyssey, the likes of which I hope to never face again. Anger, anxiety, betrayal, humiliation, many selfish, but I hope understandable emotions. But these have given way to light, both spiritual and intellectual. It's been fortifying. I know that I don't need the accoutrements of fame to know God and be happy. Wow, okay. But after everything over the last year, I think I'm a better man and father to my 3 teenage daughters. Far from perfect, but better. An interesting way to end. And by the way, yeah, another invocation of I'm the father of daughters. I mean, you just said it was a men's problem. It could be just, I don't know whether he has any sons. I mean, if what he's got is daughters, then fine. But, you could be a better parent to anybody, I think, after a year like this. And I think he would agree. I don't think that he was hiding from that. Okay. I thought that was very interesting. And a good place for a little bit of discussion along the way. And also just good for the record, right? He says that's not me. And yeah, I was an eyewitness to you saying it. So that nails that particular issue down. And I'm glad he did it. So there's much more to come, of course. But you know what? Since I began playing the beginning of it, I might as well yield for the moment to Eric Posman and his latest essay. It's just a couple of minutes after all, and we happen to have the time for it at the moment. An essay he wrote after one of the earlier blow-ups about Donald Trump and his BSing and his conceit and his ego. With respect to time and being named the person of the year. Let's roll that since I already started anyway.
Good morning, Kagro. It's Eric from Orlando. I haven't subscribed to a weekly periodical in a long time. And when I did, it was Newsweek. But the recent kerfuffle about Donald Trump and Time's Person of the Year got me thinking about 2017 and the difference makers and the themes that reflect these surreal times. If it were my vote, I would look at who best represents the opposite of Trump. Someone who reflects the values of our emerging progressive society. Someone who embodies the contrast to white privilege. Someone who shows restraint and grace in the face of criticism and anger. His name is Colin Kaepernick. He's the symbol of a national movement, but didn't seek the attention. He's been castigated by Trump and the sanctimonious flag wavers, but he hasn't clapped back. He's been blackballed by the NFL, but hasn't cried about it in the press. He won't do interviews, letting his good work speak for him. His Know Your Rights Camp series teaches young people about higher education, nutrition, self-empowerment, and instructs on how to properly interact with law enforcement. He has donated his time and money to a myriad of causes, funding urban food deserts, beds for single mothers and their children, debate training for high schoolers, medical supplies for the Standing Rock protesters, the list goes on and on. He was even spotted outside a New York City parole office personally handing out 100 suits. Kaepernick isn't seeking fame or credit. He's just going out and proving that actions trump talk, thereby trumping Trump and exposing the NFL owner consortium as dishonest and feckless. But this year seems different. Like the person of the year is too big for one person, even Robert Mueller, who will almost certainly be the choice in 2018. So I did some homework on Wikipedia. Time has done this many times before. 1956 was the Hungarian freedom fighter. 1969 was the Middle Americans. 1982 was the computer. 1988, the endangered Earth. 2002, the whistleblowers. And 2011 was the protester, singular, in the year of the Arab Spring, the Tea Party, and Occupy Wall Street. So those are a few examples. And the theme for 2017 has to be less of a protest and more of a reaction to the blatant criminality that has been allowed to exist in this country for too long. Time's Person of the Year should be the fourth estate, the media. In times littered with so much propaganda and blatant lies coming from the highest sources, there remains the dogged search for facts from our maligned yet relentless news agencies. The Washington Post remains the champion of sourcing, blowing up Michael Flynn's brief run as National Security Advisor and exposing Roy Moore's history of deviant behavior. And while the New York Times has had shaky moments, their reporting has certainly checked this administration on a constant basis. And the traditional press has extended to the electronic media, with outlets like The Intercept and BuzzFeed reporting on dangerous truths that you won't get from the personality and ratings-driven corporate TV news outlets. Which is why this year's biggest news headlines extend well beyond the coverage of Trump and his kleptocratic cabinet. It's been the outing of the culture of sexual harassment and sexual assault and the shameless white male power structure that's dominated politics and entertainment ever since forever. Ronan Farrow's takedown of Harvey Weinstein came on the heels of Gabriel Sherman's destruction of Roger Ailes and the culture of Fox News, and opened up the floodgates for the Me Too stories that will certainly unearth many more names across the cultural landscape, and will bring the new order sooner than we ever imagined. So this holiday season, we should all go out and buy a scoop hat and a palm-sized reporter pad and teach our kids to become journalists. As for Colin Kaepernick, he can still be Sportsman of the Year for Time's sister magazine, Sports Illustrated. They are both part of Time Incorporated, which is reportedly about to be sold to the Koch brothers, so you better make your statement while you still can. Time will reveal its Person of the Year on December 6th. David Waldman, December 6th. So now, back to you.
I hear you, Eric. I guess it's a good thing then. I didn't wait any longer. So good, we got that in on time. I probably should have remembered that you gave me that warning at the end. And, well, then I would have had an even better excuse for playing it. But good, thank you, timely. That's an interesting discussion to have. Does Time have the guts to name essentially themselves and all their colleagues as Person of the Year, the media? That's a tall order. It's interesting. I mean, is that too much braggadocio for themselves? I mean, you make a good case for it, and it's true, and it's something that we say on this show all the time. You know, we bash journalists, we bash bad journalism, whatever. We bash, the New York Times did this terrible thing, and everybody wants to unsubscribe or cancel their subscriptions to the New York Times, and I've gone the opposite way. But I felt like it was a business thing. I can't rely on the New York Times for so much content on the show and not pay them for what they do. If I think they do a terrible job, although I wouldn't, for instance, say, well, in that case, on that logic, I have to subscribe to Breitbart because they provide, but actually they don't provide all that much content for the show. We laugh about the fact that they suck and they provide terrible content to everybody else. We don't read their content. So we certainly don't read it the way we do the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I just think fair is fair. If I'm going to ask you to contribute to the support of this show, I think it would be pretty unfair not to offer up some support where there's a formal structure for doing it. Although, I mean, I guess we should, by the same logic, I should be sending checks to Eric and a bigger check to Scott and all the rest of you contributors too. But, well, if we were a gigantic operation with lots and lots of money flowing in, well, then I suppose I could offer to do something like that. That's up to the rest of you. But with so much content being provided for the show by the New York Times, Washington Post, I felt it was only fair to pay them for it. But yeah, there's good points, there's bad points. It all works out. Sometimes I'm a little freaked out. There's a little bit of a Talking Heads reference for you there, but there's a lot of stuff that we wouldn't know, and just angles on it that make these stories or give these stories legs that literally there's just simply no other way we would have known it but for these journalists. And in a way, they do deserve this recognition. It's just, I guess, because it was their choice to be the ones that bestow the award, but journalism bestowing an award to journalists, I think they'd be just too uncomfortable with it. The Colin Kaepernick suggestion, certainly a good one for Sports Illustrated and a great one for Person of the Year, too. It would piss off Trump to no end. But hopefully your Person of the Year award is about more than that, and there's certainly more that Kaepernick does that's worthy of the designation. But that's the way it would be viewed. And so, and then the next question is, if you were to consider Kaepernick, right? Do we care about how it's viewed, or do we care about what we think about this sort of thing? Lots to do on, lots to consider on that front. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I know you've sent me a number of articles, outside articles as well, about Kaepernick, and he makes a fantastic subject for discussion. But there's so much other crazy crap going on out there that I feel like we can't give time over to it. So I'm glad that you reminded everybody of all the good that he does outside of the spotlight. He really seems to be kind of an amazing guy outside of the protest issue, which is equally or even more amazing. Now, let's see. Other stories that I think we absolutely need to try and squeeze into the discussion here. Let's see. There was, of course, the claim that the president can't obstruct justice. I told you that there was an explanation out there. I think I kind of summarized it, but Axios was the one with the big news on it this morning. Oh, yeah. You know what? Greg actually read you, I think, what was essentially John Dowd's explanation for why that can't happen. Just that he's the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution's Article 2 and has every right to express his view of any case, which shaky as explanations go. But I guess, I guess the job's been done there, and so we don't need to necessarily put more time into that one. Let's see. By the way, The Guardian has done some reporting on a subject about which I was very curious. Why did Roy Moore escape to Australia? Clues remain, their headline says, in the outback wilderness. We were wondering when we read the story of Roy Moore, well, really, when we read the story of his being banned from the Gadsden Mall and the local YMCA for badgering the teenage girls there, and then that he subsequently left town and went to Texas and Australia for some undetermined amount of time. I wondered how long, and whether anybody had asked around in Australia or Texas whether he had any police complaints about him there. So I don't know if that was the spirit in which they went forth to do this piece, but the answer is no, not so far. The Guardian didn't find anything other than some, the memories of a few people with whom he stayed who said, he was a normal guy. Although in hindsight, it was clear that he was dealing with some personal issues of some sort. One, he never said what the issues were. Two, he never gave any hint that those would have been the issues. This comes as a real surprise to us. Michael McGowan wrote the piece, and there's little point in my sharing it with you, but I will give you the link. You can read it for yourself. Long story short, there he stayed with with a family that had included in it some teenage girls, and then in hindsight, they say, if he was going to pull some kind of stunt, it probably would have been with me, and he never did, and he never hinted at it. And, they basically had this family that he stayed with in the Australian outback basically say, he was nothing but a gentleman here. He was kind of an oddball, and he was clearly working through some issues, but no, that never made itself obvious to us. So good for him, I guess. And it's interesting background to read, but none of what you or I may have imagined might have been the case in Australia happened there. So he clearly escaped from Alabama in an attempt to, well, probably an attempt to give himself some distance and maybe get his act together. But I don't know. He came back and he, married another relatively young woman, and at least one person who says that they were sexually assaulted by him during his marriage. So I guess it didn't solve everything. But in case you were wondering, no, so far no arrest records or complaints about him elsewhere. So what else is out here? A Wall Street Journal piece that appeared yesterday, raising a lot of eyebrows. I don't know how much of it I will be able to call up now because, of course, they're hidden behind a paywall. And I don't use the Wall Street Journal enough to pay them for their content. But Michael Bender, it says here in my preview version anyway, wrote this piece, the hook of which is that, it begins this way, and this is all I've got here. So, ready? Chief of Staff John Kelly, over the past 5 months, has imposed discipline and rigorous protocols on a freewheeling White House. Lots of people have some critiques about how well he's done that. But President Donald Trump has found the loopholes. The president on occasion has called White House aides to the private residence in the evening, and that's creepy enough. But he there makes assignments and asks them not to tell Mr. Kelly about the plans. According to several people familiar with the matter, at least once, aides have declined to carry out the requested task. Why? Not because necessarily it's illegal or unconstitutional, but because they don't want to run afoul of Mr. Kelly. So the question is, what kind of authority does John Kelly wield in the White House? And I guess it's considerable if you will refuse the president so as not to incur the wrath of John Kelly. But on the other hand, is he really running a tight ship if the president can summon you after hours to the private residence and give you a task that only sometimes people reject on the condition that you not tell the chief of staff about it? But that's the kind of, that's the sort of dangerous maniac Donald Trump, Dotard J. Trump, really is. Anyway, interesting point, even if we can't flesh it out because firewall. Anyway, let's see. Another piece that appeared over the weekend, very interesting one, in the New York Times. Let's present it this way. The headline of the Times piece, one that Greg mentioned, operative offered Trump campaign, a scare quoted, Kremlin connection using NRA ties. And it's an interesting story. Nicholas Fandos has put this one together, and I'll give you the lead as a teaser and then move over to a different type of treatment of it, and then perhaps return back to the article. A conservative operative trumpeting his close ties to the National Rifle Association and Russia told a Trump campaign advisor last year that he could arrange a back-channel meeting between Donald J. Trump and Vladimir V. Putin, the Russian president, according to an email sent to the Trump campaign. A May 2016 email to the campaign advisor, Rick Dearborn, bore the subject line, Kremlin connection. In it, the NRA member said he wanted the advice of Mr. Dearborn and Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, then a foreign policy advisor to Mr. Trump and Mr. Dearborn's longtime boss, about how to proceed in connecting the two leaders. That is very interesting, don't you think? We'll return to the article and find out more about it, but I wanted to let you know if this was lighting light bulbs over your head, like either, oh yeah, or I already knew that, or hey, wait a minute, you're not the only one. And the reason you're not the only one is, of course, not me, but actual journalists who do things and write articles that I read with you. Noah Shachtman, tweeting on the subject, as a matter of fact, great to see the New York Times advancing the reporting by the Daily Beast and others on the Kremlin NRA connection. And in addition to this article, which he included a link to, there were 2 Daily Beast pieces, one of which I recognize because we've read it on the air. Do you remember this one? It's the Daily Beast piece authored by Tim Mack from back in February of 2017. The Kremlin and GOP have a new friend, and boy, does she love guns. Do you remember the story, longtime listeners, of Maria Butina? Depending on who's asking, Maria Butina is either a Russian central bank staffer, a gun rights advocate, or a connection between D.C. Republicans and Russia. If you don't remember, I will remind you, but I'll have to wait until after the break to do it. But when I do, I bet your eyebrows will shoot. Well, they're going to shoot right straight through the roof. So make sure you're in a good position, not under any full bathtubs or anything like that. And your insurance is up to date. I'll tell you all about this and remind you about it in the other reporting on the subject after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. Let's finish up for the day, and we should probably also check in with comments that have come in, because there are a couple. I anticipated that we would hear something like this, and I, with good reason. Monica, our mommy CA20, tweets to us, the media gave us President Donald Trump, and they haven't even recognized their role in it, so I wouldn't be so eager to give them Person of the Year. And I think that they would be very hesitant to give it to themselves for that reason and for others. They know what the pushback would be. But I thought it was a point well taken, I think, from Eric. They deserve a lot of credit for what they have done. They deserve a lot of blame for what they've done. Things are complicated. People are complicated. Like we're finding out with all of these allegations about sexual harassment. There's definitely some people out there who were previously regarded as very accomplished people, and we even thought that what they had accomplished was good. And some of it probably would endure as good, although some of it will be reevaluated in light of what we now know about them. But for instance, when Nancy Pelosi found herself in such a difficult spot trying to answer on television for the John Conyers problem and saying he was an icon, and that got her a lot of grief, and we can see why pretty quickly, and people were angry and upset about finding out the news and then to call him an icon. But I guess stepping back from this, he was an icon to that point anyway. Bill Cosby was at one point an icon, and then we found out, we should not make an icon of him. So it wouldn't necessarily be something we say of him now, but like most complex situations, there are things that a person will have done in their lives which are good and you can and should keep, and there are things that are so bad that a person has done that you say, thanks for all that good stuff, but we can't keep you around even in the hopes of getting more good stuff out of you because you're too bad, and it makes sense to get rid of you now. And we all lose from your poor decision-making and awful behavior. So, you have to, at some point, dismiss somebody and just say, I can't entertain any more input from you, no matter how good some of the things you've done might be. It was an interesting discussion, short Twitter discussion over the weekend about that, as that came up once or twice. And, the idea of having referred to him as an icon and saying, having an argument with people who say, what did she really have to consider at that point? Why not just say, yeah, he should step down? Why hedge? And of course, the answer really is you're talking about, the leader of a large and disparate coalition being asked to speak for the entirety of that coalition without consulting them. And that's troubling and a sure path to losing your position of authority. And by that, I mean both position of power and the ability to speak with authority for your coalition members. If, for instance, why might it not have been a good idea to simply blurt out, yeah, he's got to go, period, end of sentence, I'm the leader, I declare it. Aside from the issue of leadership dynamics, there's the dynamics of that. Remember who your coalition is. On the one hand, there will be women in the coalition who say, yeah, that's what you say in the face of that kind of revelations of those kinds of revelations of abuse. On the other hand, there will be people of color who say, now, we will likely come to that same conclusion and very quickly, but hold on, you're talking about one of the co-founders of the Congressional Black Caucus. And especially at a moment when we're busy rightfully drumming abusers out of public life, yes, let's not, for instance, follow up on the gee whiz, let's approach it with caution with respect to Al Franken, white man, but to hell with all of that for John Conyers, black man, because that'll be an issue, right? You can't just say, speaking for the entire Democratic caucus and, of course, the Congressional Black Caucus, to hell with this guy and everything he's done. He's out of here. You know, they're going to say, you know what? I could have said that too about John Conyers, and it would have been nice if you had maybe given the Black Caucus the opportunity to do that rather than, you know, I mean, certainly if they had some disagreements about it, the charge would be leveled. Rather than white-splaining to us how to deal with our problems, we'll deal. You know, might have been nice to bring the current head of the Congressional Black Caucus on television to discuss the problem too, or instead. But okay, you went with Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. A natural choice, to be sure, but probably... And maybe you did it because you knew very well that you wouldn't be able to simply speak for the caucus right then and there and reach that conclusion for everybody without even consulting with the women in the caucus, the people of color in the caucus, the men in the caucus, the whoever, you know, who wants to have input on things. Democrats, let people have input on this stuff. Could she have avoided saying icon? She could have avoided it, certainly. Was it a great choice of words? Well, you know, it's correct. He is an icon for other things, among other, you know, for things that he's done in the past. Does he lose that status? Very likely. Though that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't erase what he's done. And, you know, the point really is, you might have reached exactly the same conclusion, but reaching it without even a moment's thought to, you know what? I need input from my people here on this question. That jeopardizes the leadership position. And, you know, part of the leadership position is you end up taking heat. There's going to be a couple of hot moments here. And it may itself cost you the leadership position, but the right way to handle it, truthfully, from a leadership perspective, yes, it's true that sometimes you're called upon to make snap decisions like this, but this is really something where you're going to have some real sensitivity to the coalition members and trust that they will also reach the same conclusion. Although, again, that would have been something that would have been fine to say too. But under the lights, maybe not the best decision, but you say, I guess you could say this would be weasel words, but you could go and you say it. Look, I'm responsible to an entire caucus full of a lot of different people here. And I have no doubt that they're all going to reach the same kind of conclusion here, but I want to hear from them first. I wish you could hear from them first, but you've invited me, and I'm not going to stomp on any toes here by telling you what my caucus is going to decide. I will predict, my guess is, we're going to say, it's time for him to step down. It's time for him to go. But I need to hear from my people. I need to hear from his people. I need to hear from people who have worked with him in the past. And I want to hear, part of the story is going to be, let me hear their regret and anguish about this, and let them explain it in their own words instead of sending me to do it. It's going to be tough. Anyway, didn't mean to get into that tangent necessarily, but I thought a good observation from Monica, and some good redirection on some other things here too as well. Rebecca Roman's reminding us, I don't know if she says, I don't know if you mentioned it, don't remember if you mentioned this aspect of the tax scam bill. I believe Joan did when she was on Wednesday, but she's referring to this, this tweet which reads, "We are livid. Ted Cruz and Pence snuck 529 into the text, but 529 is a section, I guess, number, to undermine women's abortion rights. New language declares human fetuses as legal persons for tax purposes, a setup for repeal of Roe v. Wade." Could be entirely true, but yes, Joan definitely mentioned that, but it bears mention twice, I think. A good point, Rebecca. And another one, which she says, "You got to be effing kidding me here." Ashley Feinberg tweeting, much the same sentiment by just simply bashing on her keyboard here. Forward.com with this rather incredible story. This also grew out of the weekend's events with Mike Flynn and the implication of Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner was right to, quote, collude with Russia because he did it for Israel. And, that'll cause some frustration. Yes, one of the twists and spins on the Mike Flynn story was, first it started with conservative pushback that talking to a foreign government for a transition organization isn't illegal or even a bad thing to do. And there's some nuance in there and some shading. And obviously the incoming administration is going to want to establish some connections and often can do it properly. This one couldn't. By properly, I mean, I think we used to all understand that what that meant was, listen, I'm not the president yet, but I'm going to be, and I want to get off on the right foot, etc. But there's one president at a time, and I recognize this because I stand for the rule of law, and so therefore, blah, 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 right, But he doesn't do that, and instead, he immediately tries to interfere. What was he doing? And this is another part of the conservative pushback, was they said, what was happening here was, it wasn't Russia influencing us, it was us trying to influence Russia, you see. What they're talking about is, there was a pending UN Security Council resolution condemning Israel's illegal settlements. And I think we're all relatively familiar with that issue. And, Israel is pretty regularly the subject of condemnation proposals in the Security Council and elsewhere. And the United States has traditionally stood by Israel on those things and has, when they're in the Security Council, utilized its automatic veto as a permanent Security Council member to protect them from that. And huge debate rages around that for decades. Another such proposal was pending, and this time the United States, under Barack Obama, president at the time, was planning specifically not to block it in the Security Council with its permanent member status, but to abstain from the vote and allow this vote to go forward. That no doubt bothered Israel a great deal, and I don't know whether they reached out to Kushner or the Trump administration more generally, or whether it was straight to Kushner. There was a pre-existing relationship there between Netanyahu and the Kushner family. Anyway, they prevailed on the Trump transition team to try and speak with the foreign ministers of all of the then members of the Security Council to prevail on them to try to get others to vote no on this resolution, which was improper because, of course, they weren't the United States administration at that time, and it was an improper role for them to take on. But, that segment of conservatives who believe that there's for whatever reason, they count themselves great allies of Israel, and there are lots of shades to that. But anyway, They wanted him to. They wanted the incoming Trump administration to lean on the foreign ministers on the Security Council to vote no on this thing, and conservatives in America at this point now point to this thing and say, "See, we were trying to influence Russia, which is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, to vote no on this. It wasn't Russia trying to influence us, but us trying to influence Russia on behalf of Israel." And that may be true, but of course it probably also doesn't describe the entirety of the interactions between the incoming Trump administration and Russia, and also still represents a problematic and possibly illegal interference in the then current Obama administration's foreign policy. By the way, I see this is still the Hill is still trying to make a story out of the fact that Hope Hicks, as they say, steamed Trump's suits while he wore them on the campaign trail. And to be honest, I am not certain whether they're trying to make that into a sexual thing or what. We certainly laughed about it that way, but they've been tweeting this thing for so long. I wonder what it is about it that we're all missing. How did Hope Hicks do it? I don't know if anybody cares that she did. But if you care, I just like to say, how does she do it every time her name comes up? Anyway, I had a much more important story pending. Not that everyone else's comments weren't important. That's why I interrupted for it. But much more important than the Hope Hicks steaming the suit story. It was the New York Times report of an operative offering the Trump campaign a Kremlin connection using the NRA and his ties with the NRA. I reminded you of Maria Butina, who you may not have remembered just from my hints about it, but if you read the beginning of that Tim Mack story in the Daily Beast that Noah Shachtman pointed to, it might ring a bell for you. Just a few years ago, Maria Butina, you remember this woman, owned a furniture store in Siberia. Now she's wheeling and dealing with D.C. think tankers, Republican strategists, and a Russian bank chief with alleged mob connections. But then they all have that, right? Depending on the audience, Butina maybe, has presented herself as a Russian central bank staffer, a leading gun rights advocate, of course you could be both, a representative of the Russian Federation, a Washington, D.C. graduate student, a journalist, and a connection between Team Trump and Russia. She used each role to help her gain more high-level contacts in the nation's capital. It's another chapter in what's becoming a familiar story in Washington, Kremlin-connected operators building bridges to the GOP. But of course, at the time, the surprising part of it was the NRA connection. And so Noah's quite right, I guess, in saying that the New York Times is advancing the reporting by the Daily Beast and others, as he notes, on the Kremlin-NRA connection. So because we read the other one earlier, as much fun as it would be to revisit it, I thought probably a better use of our time to read the current New York Times piece on it and see where they're going with it and who we're talking about here. We read the lead of Nicholas Fandos's piece earlier in the show. Of course, a conservative operative trumpeting his close ties to the NRA and Russia told a Trump campaign advisor last year that he could arrange a back-channel meeting between Trump and Putin. Remember that? Russia, he wrote, this was an email to campaign advisor Rick Dearborn, asking advice of Dearborn and Sessions on how to get to Trump to talk about making this connection. Russia, this person wrote, was quietly but actively seeking a dialogue with the U.S. and would attempt to use the NRA's annual convention in Louisville, Kentucky, to make, quote, first contact. The email, which was among a trove of campaign-related documents turned over to investigators on Capitol Hill, was described in detail to the New York Times. Robert Mueller, the special counsel investigating Russian interference and possible collusion, secured a guilty plea on Friday from President Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, for lying to the FBI about contacts with Moscow's former ambassador to the United States, but those contacts came after Mr. Trump's improbable election victory. The email outreach from the conservative operative to Mr. Dearborn came far earlier, around the same time that Russians were trying to make other connections to the Trump campaign. And that is that's actually linked, and the link is to this story from earlier in November. Top Russian official tried to broker backdoor meeting between Trump and Putin. And so we're talking about, I guess, is it Alexander Torshin, the top Russian official that we're talking about here, governor of the Russian Central Bank. Anyway, so yeah, it came around the same time that Russians were trying to make other connections to the Trump campaign. I guess you should also note for the record that it came about a month before the Trump Tower meeting with Donald Jr. as well. And as others have pointed out to me via Twitter over the weekend, maybe helps explain the lack of surprise on Donald Trump Jr.'s part when he is approached with the offer of, or an offer that mentions an official effort by the Russian government to help Trump in the election. So, yes, it came around the same time as Russians were trying to make other connections. Another contact came through an American advocate for Christian and veterans causes, and together the outreach shows how, as Mr. Trump closed in on the nominations, Russians were using three foundational pillars of the Republican Party: guns, veterans, and Christian conservatives, to try to make contact with his unorthodox campaign. Which I guess speaks, again, to some of the sophistication that the Russians actually had. I don't know whether that was something they were really gleaning from elsewhere, either from Cambridge Analytica via conduits like possibly Kushner, or whether they were just able to see. I mean, it's all pretty out there, right? The current White House press secretary's father's book says, God, guns, grits, whatever else, gays, I don't know whether you put him in their title of his book or not, was going to be a foundational pillar of where Republicans were coming from. So it wasn't going to be a bad guess, that's for sure. Both efforts, made within days of each other, centered on the NRA's annual meeting and appear to involve Alexander Torshin, there he is, a deputy governor of the Russian Central Bank and a key figure in Mr. Putin's United Russia Party, who was instructed to make contact with the campaign. Putin is deadly serious about building a good relationship with Mr. Trump. And when Putin is deadly serious about that, that sometimes means polonium is in the picture, and you got to take it seriously. That's what this NRA member and conservative activist Paul Erickson wrote, and he spells it, by the way, the same way Eric Erickson does, and I don't know whether there's any relationship or not, but okay. He wants to extend an invitation to Mr. Trump to visit him in the Kremlin before the election. Let's talk through what has transpired and Senator Sessions' advice on how to proceed. It is not clear how Mr. Dearborn handled the outreach. He forwarded a similar proposal made through Rick Clay, an advocate for conservative Christian causes, to Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and top campaign aide. Mr. Kushner rebuffed the proposal at the time, according to two people who have seen Mr. Kushner's email. So that's interesting. But Kushner was not rebuffing it with respect to Israel, we now find out, of course. One of the things we found out over the weekend, or on Friday, I guess, was that I guess the claim is that Flynn's contact, conservative defenders of Flynn and Trump, saying none of his contacts that he established before the inauguration were problematic, and that they had, and of course we were being told that Flynn had agreed to testify that he was making those contacts at Trump's direction, or perhaps he may have said Trump organization or the Trump campaigns or the incoming administration's direction. And it was later hinted that, well, there's all sorts of speculation about who was it that was giving him these instructions. It seems to have landed on implicating at least two figures in the transition, Jared Kushner being one, who by the end of Friday was purported to have ordered, that was the word, that he's ordered Flynn to make contact with the foreign ministers, which is an extraordinarily arrogant, amazingly arrogant thing to be doing, is come in as the candidate's son-in-law and ordering former Lieutenant General Michael Flynn to do this stuff. But Flynn, I guess, was happy to take those marching orders. But also K.T. McFarland, goofball, who I guess, I don't know where she sits at this point, but wasn't she one of the people who was a deputy to Flynn, and she survived him for a while? I don't know whether she's still inside government or not, but who's came straight out of Fox News and became a national security figure, And she ended up as his deputy. How is she ordering anything? We'll have to clarify that as we delve further into this story later in the week. But anyway, I'll continue with as much of this story from the New York Times about the NRA connection as I can. It's not clear how Mr. Dearborn handled the outrage, right? But Kushner apparently says he rebuffed it via email. Mr. Sessions told investigators from the House Intelligence Committee that he did not recall the outreach, according to 3 people with knowledge of the exchange. Dearborn did not return requests for comment, and Ty Cobb, the White House lawyer dealing with this stuff, declined to comment as well. Repeated attempts to reach Mr. Erickson were not successful. Intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia, on orders from the highest levels of its government, that'd be Putin, undertook a sophisticated campaign to hack Democratic computers, spread propaganda, and undermine the candidacy of Hillary Clinton. The repeated outrage around the NRA convention, where Mr. Trump accepted the group's endorsement, came just weeks after a self-described intermediary for the Russian government told George Papadopoulos that the Russians had dirt on Mrs. Clinton, and just weeks later, the president's eldest son arranged a meeting at Trump Tower with, well, you know who was there, Veselnitskaya and others. The Kremlin believes that the only possibility of a true reset in this relationship would be with a new Republican White House. Mr. Erickson wrote Mr. Dearborn, adding, ever since Hillary compared Putin to Hitler, all senior Russian leaders consider her beyond redemption. Very interesting. Congressional investigators obtained the email as part of their inquiry into Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election, etc., etc. Dianne Feinstein of California, a top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, penned letters to several Trump campaign foreign policy advisors last week asking for all documents related to the NRA, Mr. Erickson, Mr. Torkshin, Mr. Clay, Mr. Dearborn, and others. Erickson, a longtime conservative operative who's been involved in several presidential campaigns, presented himself in the email as a well-connected intermediary in the upper reaches of the Russian government. Really? By happenstance and the reach of the NRA, Mr. Erickson wrote, he had been put in a position to slowly begin cultivating a back channel to President Putin's Kremlin in recent years. It's so interesting that the connection between the NRA and the Kremlin has grown that way. And that really is the subject more of the Daily Beast pieces. I'm definitely going to include the link to that because you got to refresh your memory about how Russia's ultra-right has made connections with America's ultra-right, including the NRA and the so-called alt-right, in their mutual interest in guns. And boy, I mean, as I was saying last night, I remember, I'm so old, I remember when the NRA used to advocate that Americans needed to be armed at all times in case the Russians invaded. We were supposed to be armed. And I think the idea was that we were supposed to repel the invasion, not join it and co-opt it and use it to overthrow the American government. But things have changed. Russia is our friend now, and I have my doubts, ladies and gentlemen. Maria Butina does make an appearance a few paragraphs down, and they do help review for us in the New York Times article a lot of what is in the Daily Beast article, including not only Maria Butina's right to bear arms Russian gun rights group, but also, for instance, the visits of David Keene and David Clark to Russia under their auspices and the strange cultural exchanges that went on in between the two. It's an interesting connection. We'll see whether we can flesh it out any further in the rest of the week. And, we'll be spending Tuesday and the balance of the week catching up on the other crazy stories that just didn't make the cut on this particular day. Oh, crazy. But as always, you can depend on our programming here on Netroots Radio subsequent to today's show to catch you up on a lot of those stories. It seems to be one of the main functions of previously of the after show and these days of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now, of course, a daily feature following this show right here on Netroots Radio. For today, here's what we got. Starting off in the front cafe, we have a small hors d'oeuvre of Max Boot telling Fareed Zakaria that Trump is making him feel like a foreigner in his own country. I don't know if there's probably a lot of foreigners in this country seeking citizenship who could say, yeah, well, good. I'm glad you're getting a taste of it. Then, on the rest of the menu, we'll examine how a Vermont resident of a retirement community made ricin, yikes, and tested the poison on his neighbors, her neighbors. Holy mackerel! This is terrible. Okay. In a deal that would further consolidate the U.S. healthcare industry, CVS Health Corporation plans to buy Aetna, believe it or not, for $69 billion, and the Trump administration's betrayal of American values stops for nothing, not even a hurricane. That was the only part of that entire feature that I didn't screw up in some way. That Aetna news is really amazing. After the break, they move to the chef's table for a discussion on how novelist Joan Didion's disillusionment with her own story and family narrative positioned her especially well to see through the self-deception of others.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, thank God for the chef's table. I wasn't going to take you there, but Justice will do that for you and more following our conclusion here. Do stay tuned. All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Bon appetit, as he likes to conclude. I will be back tomorrow to continue the documentation of these tragedies.